They said it would be the wedding of the year, a celebration that would draw in Florida's most powerful families, a night where the air itself seemed heavy with the weight of wealth, prestige, and promise. Every chandelier in the ballroom blazed with light, every crystal flute was filled to the brim, every smile carefully rehearsed for the photographs that would circle in magazines for weeks. But then, it happened. The music stopped first, not all at once, but like a wave collapsing mid-ocean. The band faltered, their instruments hanging in mid-air. A sound, sharp, unexpected, cut through the room, a gasp, then another. And then the chaos began. Chairs scraped violently against the polished marble floors. Voices rose, jagged and uncontrolled, colliding into one another like shards of glass. Security pushed through the wall of bodies, their black suits stark against the gold and ivory of the ballroom's grandeur. In the middle of it all stood Naomi. Her gown, once a perfect cascade of silk, now hung torn at the hem, dragging like a wounded thing across the floor. Her bouquet, white roses bound with satin, lay abandoned at her feet, petals scattered as if even they couldn't bear witness to what had been seen. Her hands were still, but her eyes were fixed, locked somewhere far beyond the crowd. It was as if she was no longer standing in that ballroom at all, but in another room entirely. A room where everything she thought she knew about her life had been stripped away in a single heartbeat. Across from her, backed into a mirrored wall, was Williams, the man who, moments earlier, had been her husband in all but signature. His once tailored perfection was unraveling. Shirt half open, collar twisted, hair damp with sweat. His face was colorless, drained to the last drop. He said nothing. Perhaps he couldn't. The crowd didn't know exactly what had happened, not yet, but they could feel it, and soon every single person in that ballroom would wish they had left before the truth reached them. Because Naomi had seen something, and once you see a thing like that, you cannot unsee it. Her hand trembled as she pushed open a door, not here, not now, but hours earlier. A door that had been closed to her. Light spilled out in a narrow strip. She took one step inside, and everything she believed about love, family, and loyalty cracked. And yet, as devastating as that moment was, it was only the first blow, because Naomi wasn't the only one with a secret. And before the night was over, the truth would be standing in the very center of that ballroom, holding a child, hours before the chaos, before the torn gown, the frozen stares, and the whispers that would stain two families for generations. There was only beauty. Naomi had woken to a Florida morning so perfect it almost felt scripted. The sky stretched in a cloudless expanse, the sun caught in the waves of Biscayne Bay, and the air held that soft, warm salt that promised a day without storms. She was 27, the youngest daughter of a family whose name opened doors in every corner of the state. Her posture, her poise, even the way she greeted hotel staff, it all told the story of someone raised in a house where elegance was not an accessory, but an expectation. Williams, he was different. 32, self-made, or at least that's the story he allowed people to tell. In public, his smile was effortless, the kind that disarmed questions before they could be asked. He was the man who made deals over dinner, who could walk into a room of strangers and walk out with friends and favors. Their families had called the match destiny. The venue reflected it, a luxury hotel ballroom so drenched in opulence that even the gold leaf detailing seemed to shimmer under the weight of expectation. 2 grand staircases curled down into a sea of marble, where waiters in white gloves glided with trays of champagne. Every table was a statement of excess. Crystal glassware, imported roses, place cards with embossed lettering that caught the light. Over 400 guests had arrived, governors, CEOs, foreign dignitaries. Naomi's mother made a point of being seen at the center of every conversation. William's father laughed loud enough for the sound to reach across the room. From the outside, nothing was missing. But from the inside, there was something that didn't quite match the picture. It wasn't in the flowers, the food, or the music. It was quieter than that, a detail you couldn't photograph. A tension, invisible to the uninvited, that ran under the day like a slow, steady current. A current that, by nightfall, would drag everyone in this room into waters they would not know how to escape. Naomi could feel it in glances that ended too quickly, in her mother's hand gripping her elbow a second too long, in William's eyes, warm but never still. And though she didn't know it yet, before the first toast was raised, the celebration she thought she was walking into would become a battlefield. Before I tell you what happened, tell me, where are you watching from? If you stay silent, when you hear what happened to Naomi, you'll wish you'd spoken up. It hadn't always been like this. The glances that didn't linger, the silences that felt heavier than words. In the beginning, there had only been light. Naomi met Williams at a charity gala in Palm Beach. She remembered the first moment she saw him, not because he stood out, but because he didn't seem to try. While others angled for attention, adjusting cufflinks and rehearsing smiles, he leaned casually against the bar, watching the crowd as though he already understood the outcome of every conversation in the room. He spoke to her only once that night, but it was enough. The next morning, a bouquet of orchids arrived at her office, with a note written in handwriting that looked almost too neat to be his, for the only person who didn't need the spotlight to own the room. From there, the story wrote itself, or so it seemed. Beachside dinners under strings of soft yellow lights, weekend getaways to islands where their names meant instant upgrades. Williams arriving unannounced with gifts that were never ordinary, not just jewelry, but pieces with stories, with histories. Naomi's friends would tease her, saying she was living the kind of romance people pretended existed only in films. Their families began to weave themselves together. Investments merged. Businesses crossed hands in quiet, seamless transactions. It wasn't just a relationship anymore. It was an alliance. And yet, even in the middle of that perfection, there were moments that didn't quite fit. A week before the wedding, Naomi woke in the middle of the night to find the other side of their bed empty. She found Williams in his study, phone pressed to his ear, his back to the door. His voice was low, urgent. She caught only one sentence before he turned and saw her. "We can't do this now. Not before the wedding." When she asked who it was, his smile came too quickly. He said it was business, nothing to worry about. But the way he exhaled, as though he'd been holding his breath for minutes, told her otherwise. She didn't press. She told herself there would be time for questions later, but time has a way of running out when you least expect it. And so, the night before their wedding, as Naomi rehearsed her vows in front of a mirror framed in gold, Williams was miles away, staring at a message that would change everything. The day before the wedding should have been a time of calm anticipation, the kind of day where every moment feels like the last step before a lifelong journey. For Naomi, it was exactly that. For Williams, it was something else entirely. He had chosen to spend the night at the hotel where the ceremony and reception would be held. A quiet suite on the top floor, away from the bustle of arriving guests and last-minute preparations. Naomi had called him in the evening, her voice warm, her words carrying the glow of someone counting down the hours. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow," she said, a smile audible in her tone. But the reply never came. The hours stretched. Downstairs, the lobby swelled with arrivals, guests checking in, bellboys pushing luggage carts, the air rich with the scent of fresh-cut flowers and expensive perfume. Upstairs, William sat alone at a table by the window, staring into the city lights. At 12:17 a.m., his phone lit up. A message. "If you love yourself, meet me before you say, 'I do.'" No name, no signature, just those words. He read it twice, then a third time, his eyes narrowing, his jaw tightening. Something in his expression shifted, as if an unspoken truth had been confirmed. He didn't reply. He didn't delete it either. He poured himself a drink, but didn't touch it. Half an hour later, he glanced toward the bedroom door, where the best man was leaning, scrolling through his own phone. Williams didn't notice the flicker of movement, the way the best man's eyes darted toward him, then to the device in his hand. He didn't see the quick swipe, the tiny smirk before the screen went dark. Naomi, miles away, sat on the edge of her bed in her parents' home, scrolling through her own messages. She thought of Williams, probably asleep, and told herself he was simply resting before the big day. She had no idea that even then, the wedding was already unraveling. If you think your own wedding could never end in disaster, share this story now. Someone you know is planning a wedding, and they have no idea what's coming. The morning of the wedding arrived with the kind of clarity photographers dream of. Sunlight spilled across the glass towers of downtown, bouncing into the bay, where yachts glided as if in slow motion. Inside the hotel, the atmosphere pulsed with excitement, the chatter of arriving guests, the low hum of staff moving quickly, but with the grace of practiced service. Down in the lobby, every step Naomi took seemed to draw attention. Her silk robe shimmered faintly as she moved between relatives and friends, her face lit with a smile that could have belonged to someone who believed this day was the start of something unbreakable. The scent of lilies and roses filled the air. The click of heels against polished marble blended with the faint notes of a string quartet rehearsing somewhere out of sight. But upstairs, William sat in silence. He was dressed, but not ready. His tie lay across the table, his jacket still on its hanger. He stared at his phone, the screen black, his reflection faint in the glass. The best man paced near the window, occasionally glancing at him, but saying nothing. At 9:06 a.m., the phone lit again. This time there was no text, only an image. He didn't need to open it to understand. The preview alone was enough. A dimly lit hotel bed, tangled sheets, two figures partially visible. The angle was just wrong enough to make denial impossible. Williams's breath caught. His hand gripped the phone so tightly the skin whitened around his knuckles. He looked toward the best man, but the man had already turned his back, pretending to adjust his cufflinks. Downstairs, Naomi laughed with her bridesmaids. She was radiant, her eyes bright, her hands moving as she described how she and Williams had first met. She didn't see the subtle glances exchanged between two of her relatives in the corner. She didn't know that while she was telling her love story, Williams was sitting upstairs, piecing together a truth that would destroy hers. The ballroom had been transformed into a cathedral of light. Rows of white chairs faced the altar, each draped with sheer fabric that fluttered gently in the cool breath of the air conditioning. Golden light from the chandeliers shimmered off the polished marble floor, and the faint fragrance of roses drifted in from the towering arrangements at either side of the aisle. The guests were ready. The priest stood waiting, hands folded over a leather-bound book. The music began, soft at first, then swelling as Naomi appeared at the top of the aisle. Every head turned, cameras rose like a tide. Naomi walked slowly, each step measured, her smile unwavering. She saw Williams at the altar, standing tall in his black suit, and any shadow of doubt she'd carried into the day seemed to melt away. But Williams didn't move. He didn't smile. As Naomi reached the final steps, he took a small step back, almost imperceptible, but enough to make her pause. The priest began the vows. Williams's turn came. He opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. Instead, he shook his head. I can't do this, he said, the words barely louder than a breath. Yet in the silence that followed, they might as well have been shouted. Naomi blinked, unsure she'd heard correctly. Williams's eyes locked onto hers, his voice low but sharp enough to cut. You know why. You know who I saw. The air shifted. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones appeared, the soft chime of cameras capturing the moment filling the stillness. Naomi's hands tightened around her bouquet. Not here, she whispered, her voice trembling. But it was too late. The first cracks in the day had been made, and now they were spreading, fast. What would you do if your groom stopped the wedding at the altar? Tell me in the comments. Security moved quietly but firmly, guiding the couple away from the altar before the whispers could become shouts. The guests were left murmuring, craning their necks for one last glimpse before the heavy doors closed. Behind the curtains, the world looked different, quieter, dimmer, the sound of the crowd now muffled to a distant, restless hum. Naomi stood still, clutching her bouquet so tightly that petals began to break under her fingers. Williams paced, running one hand down his face, as if trying to wipe away the last hour. Finally, he turned. "The hotel room," he said. His voice was low, but it had that dangerous steadiness that came when anger was being forced to behave. "Last night, you thought I wouldn't find out." Naomi's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" Williams's jaw tightened. "Don't do that. Don't pretend. I saw the picture. I know who it was." Her breath hitched. He stepped closer, lowering his voice even more. "Family." Naomi froze. Her hands loosened, and the bouquet fell to the carpet with a muffled thud. She didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it. She just stopped moving, as though a single wrong breath might shatter the rest of the day entirely. William studied her face, waiting for the flicker of guilt or fear or anything that would tell him he wasn't wrong, but all he saw was stillness, and that silence told him more than any confession ever could. While Naomi stood frozen in that small, dimly lit room, Williams's eyes shifted, not to her, but past her. Through the narrow gap in the curtain, the ballroom stretched out like a stage after the actors have left it. Guests milled in uneasy clusters, their voices dropping whenever someone walked too close. And then he saw him. A man stood at the far end of the hall, pressed halfway into the shadows where the golden light from the chandeliers couldn't quite reach. His posture was rigid, almost military, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. He wasn't a guest. His suit was too plain, too unremarkable. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even glance at the chaos around him. But his eyes were fixed directly on Williams. Williams felt the weight of that gaze, steady and unblinking, as though this man knew more about the morning, maybe even the night before, than anyone else in the room. He leaned slightly forward, as if testing whether Williams would acknowledge him. Williams didn't, not fully, but their eyes locked for a fraction of a second, and that was enough. In the space of that look, Williams understood something. This man wasn't here by accident. Naomi hadn't seen him yet. She was staring down at her bouquet on the floor, her breathing shallow. Williams's best man, however, had noticed. He broke away from the crowd, walking quickly but without drawing attention, slipping toward the man in the shadows. Williams turned his head, following with his eyes, but before he could step closer, the curtain shifted, and the priest stepped in, his voice urgent. "They're waiting for you both to decide what happens next." Williams didn't answer, because in his mind, the decision had already been made. The priest's voice faded into the background, as if the air itself had swallowed the words. Williams stepped closer to Naomi, his eyes searching hers for something, remorse, shame, even defiance, anything that could explain what he had seen. "It was your sister," he said finally, not loud, not shouted, but heavy. A statement that landed like stone in water, sinking deep and dragging everything else with it. Naomi's knees weakened, and she steadied herself against the edge of a chair. Her lips parted, but no words came. Williams continued, his tone sharper now. "She came in from overseas just 2 weeks ago. Your maid of honor, Naomi. And you let her stand beside you at the altar this morning as if nothing happened." Naomi swallowed hard, but her silence was louder than any denial could have been. In the distance, faint murmurs rose and fell in the ballroom, the restless tide of guests who could sense a storm, but didn't yet know where it would break. William's mind replayed the flashback in brutal clarity. 2 weeks earlier, her sister had arrived, bags in hand, hair still damp from travel, smile warm enough to charm anyone. She'd hugged Naomi first, then turned to Williams with that same smile. Only now he recognized it for what it was. And now, the rumors that had been traded in quiet corners, whispers about late-night calls, about closed doors and too long absences, began to make cruel, perfect sense. Naomi finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't understand." But Williams cut her off. "I understand enough. If you stay silent, you're just like the guests who saw the truth and walked away. Where are you watching from?" Before Naomi could gather the rest of her defense, before Williams could turn the knife of his accusation further, movement from the edge of the room shifted everything. The man in the shadows stepped forward. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. But with every slow, deliberate step, conversations in the ballroom thinned and stuttered to a stop. Guests turned their heads, as though sensing something that didn't belong. By the time he reached the narrow space between the tables and the small door to the side chamber, even Naomi had turned to look. She recognized him instantly, and her face drained of color. "Uncle Marlon," she whispered, though no one had introduced him today. He hadn't been invited, at least not officially. Williams narrowed his eyes. "You know him?" Naomi didn't answer. Uncle Marlon's voice was steady, deep, and cutting in the way that didn't need to be loud to command the entire room. "I told you both. Family secrets have a way of showing up whether you make space for them or not." No one moved. Even the waitstaff froze mid-step. Then he turned his gaze directly at Naomi. "I saw you, last night, and I saw who you were with." Her breath caught. She tried to speak, but Marlon held up a hand. "No, not now. You've had your turn to pretend." Williams's chest tightened. "You mean her sister?" Marlon's eyes flicked to him, sharp, confirming without words. And then he leaned closer, enough for only them to hear. "She wasn't the only one in that room, Williams." For a second, Williams forgot to breathe. "What do you mean?" But Marlon only straightened, looked toward the nearest exit, and said quietly, "You'll see soon enough." A restless murmur began to sweep across the room, low at first, but growing, spreading like dry leaves catching fire. Chairs scraped against the polished floor as a few guests edged toward the walls, sensing they might need a quick exit. Others leaned in toward their neighbors, whispering fast and sharp, their eyes darting between Naomi, Williams, and the man who had just walked in uninvited. Marlon didn't move again, but his presence was enough to tilt the air in the room. And then, the side door creaked open. All sound dropped away in an instant. It was her, Naomi's sister, hair styled perfectly, lipstick unshaken, her dress catching the soft light like nothing had happened. She stepped in slowly, scanning the room with a confidence that bordered on defiance. And when her gaze landed on Naomi, there was no sign of guilt, only a subtle, knowing smile. Naomi's hands curled into fists. Williams stared, his mind clawing for an explanation that would make sense, but every passing second made it harder to believe there was one. The sister stopped midway between them. She didn't speak at first, just let the tension feed itself. Then, in a voice just loud enough for every guest to hear, she said, "Tell him the truth, Naomi, or I will." Naomi froze. Her lips trembled, but no words came. The guests leaned forward, hungry for the answer, while others glanced toward the exit, unsure if they should witness what was about to unfold. Somewhere in the back, a champagne glass shattered against the floor, but no one turned to look. Williams's voice broke the silence. "What truth?" The sister smiled faintly. "The one that makes you realize you were never meant to be here in the first place." And just like that, the room was no longer just curious. It was bracing itself. Williams stood frozen, his eyes locked on Naomi's sister, waiting, almost daring on her to speak. But she didn't rush. She let the moment stretch until every heartbeat in the room seemed to sync with hers. Finally, she stepped closer, her heels clicking against the floor in slow, deliberate beats. "You've all been talking about what happened last night," she began, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "But no one's saying what led to it." A ripple of unease moved through the guests. Some avoided her eyes, others leaned in, hungry for the spectacle. She stopped right in front of Naomi. "You thought you could stand up there in a white dress and act like the perfect bride while hiding everything you did to get here." Naomi's voice came out as a strained whisper. "You don't know what you're talking about." Her sister's smile widened. "Oh, I do. I know about the calls you made behind his back. I know about the visits you didn't want anyone to see. And I know—" She turned, locking eyes with Williams. "Why she couldn't look you in the face last night." Williams's stomach tightened. "Just say it." The sister hesitated, not because she was unsure, but because she was enjoying the control. Then, with a steady voice, she said, "She's been meeting with someone you'd never suspect. Someone standing in this room right now." Gasps broke out, sharp and scattered. Guests craned their necks, scanning the crowd, trying to guess the name before it was spoken. Naomi stepped forward, desperation flashing in her eyes. "Stop this!" she snapped, but her voice shook. Her sister didn't stop. "In fact," she said, tilting her head toward the far side of the room, "he's been watching us the whole time." Every head turned, and in that instant, the man in the corner finally moved. The man in the corner straightened his posture, the dim light catching just enough of his face for a few gasps to escape before he even spoke. He didn't rush forward. He walked slowly, measured, as though he'd been waiting for this moment far longer than anyone realized. Every step he took closed the distance between himself and the trio at the center. William's eyes narrowed, recognition setting in, but the disbelief was heavier than his breath could manage. Naomi's lips parted, a silent plea hanging in the air that never found its way into words. When he finally stopped, just a few feet away, the tension in the room became almost unbearable. The man's gaze shifted from Naomi to Williams, then to the sister, and then he spoke. "Williams, you know me. You just never thought I'd be here like this." Williams swallowed hard. "Marcus?" A ripple of shock passed through the crowd. Marcus, Williams' closest friend, the man who had stood beside him through every milestone, the one he had trusted without question. Marcus didn't look away. "She didn't tell you, did she? About the nights we spent talking when you were too busy. About the things she confessed to me before she ever said yes to you." Naomi's voice cracked. "Marcus, stop." But Marcus's voice rose just enough to silence her. "And you." He turned toward the sister. "You knew. You saw it happening and you let it grow, because it was easier to keep her secret than to face what it would do to him." The room fell into a suffocating silence. William's jaw tightened. "Are you telling me? You and Naomi—" Marcus didn't blink. "I'm telling you that everything you thought you knew about her was built on a lie." Somewhere in the back, a chair tipped over. A guest covered her mouth, as though the words themselves were too heavy to hear. Naomi stood frozen, her eyes darting between the two men, knowing that any defense she gave now would sound like an excuse. William's breath came heavy, not from exhaustion, but from the weight pressing against his chest. For years Marcus had been the brother he never had, the one man who could speak truth to him without fear. Now that trust lay shattered on the floor, crushed beneath a truth so raw it burned to hear. His gaze slid to Naomi. Her hands trembled at her sides, fingers curling as if to hold on to something that could anchor her in the chaos. But there was nothing left to grip, not even the vows she had spoken hours earlier. The guests barely breathed. Some watched with a morbid fascination, others avoided the sight, as if witnessing the undoing of a life in public was too much to bear. William stepped forward until he was face to face with Marcus. His voice was low, steady, but laced with a rage he barely kept in check. "All those nights we talked about loyalty, all those promises, you were standing beside me, while standing behind my back." Marcus didn't flinch. "And you were blind to what was in front of you." The words hit like a slap. William's jaw flexed. His hand twitched at his side, the urge to act fighting against the last fragments of control. Naomi finally spoke, her voice breaking. "It wasn't what you think." Williams cut her off with a sharp look. "Don't. You've had every chance to tell me the truth, and you chose silence until he decided to speak for you." The sound of silverware clinking faintly on a table somewhere was the only noise in the room. Then Williams took a step back, his voice steady but colder than ice. "This wedding, this marriage, ends here." A stunned gasp swept across the crowd. Williams pulled off his wedding band and let it fall to the floor. The small metallic clang echoed in the hall like a final nail in a coffin. Without looking back, he turned and began walking toward the doors. But before he could reach them, a voice called out from the far side of the room. "Williams, you should hear the rest before you go." Every head turned. It wasn't Marcus. It wasn't Naomi. It was someone no one expected to speak, and they were holding an envelope. Williams froze mid-step. The voice was steady, measured, carrying a weight that silenced even the murmurs in the farthest corners of the hall. All eyes shifted toward the figure standing near the back, an older woman in a deep emerald dress, her posture regal, her expression unreadable. She stepped forward, the faint click of her heels cutting through the quiet. In her hand, a thick cream-colored envelope, edges worn, as though it had been opened and closed many times before. "This," she said, lifting it slightly, "is the truth you've all been circling around, but afraid to face." Williams turned fully to her now, his brow furrowed. "Who are you?" Her gaze didn't falter. "I'm the one who knew Naomi before either of you thought of marriage, and I've kept this because I believed she might change." She extended the envelope toward him. Williams hesitated, then stepped forward and took it. His fingers brushed over the seal, already broken, before sliding out the contents. A stack of photographs and a letter. The first photo made his breath catch. Naomi, Marcus, together. Not in a single careless moment, but in a series of images taken over months. Smiles, touches, glances that carried far more than friendship. The letter was worse. Naomi's handwriting. Lines confessing feelings she never voiced to him. Dates that overlapped with nights she claimed she was working late. The room felt smaller, tighter. Naomi stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Williams, He held up a hand. "No, you had your chance." His eyes drifted toward Marcus. No anger now, just a finality that felt heavier than any rage could. "You're both out of my life. Effective now." He turned back to the woman in the emerald dress. "Thank you for making sure I knew before I wasted the rest of my life." She gave a small nod. Some truths hurt more the longer they're hidden. Williams walked toward the door, the photograph still in his hand. Guests shifted out of his way without a word. At the threshold he stopped, just long enough to glance back at the life he had almost stepped into. Then he left. The door closed behind him with a quiet click, and the hall erupted, voices overlapping, accusations flying, Naomi sinking into a chair as Marcus stood frozen. But Williams didn't hear any of it. Outside, the cool air met his face, carrying a strange calm. The wedding was over. The lies were over. And for the first time in months, he was free.